Hey art nerds, today we're taking a look at the Ohuhu markers. You guys might remember my unbox and swatch video from about a month ago. Today we're revisiting and doing the field test. I'm going to have a link down in the description below to not only where you can buy these markers, but also where you can check out my initial unbox and swatch, as well as my playlist with alcohol marker reviews. This set was very generously crowdfunded by a bunch of you guys over on my Ko-fi. I want to thank you guys so much for your generosity and support. I'm going to be using Ko-fi a lot to fund future art supply reviews, just to kind of help keep things more affordable and also give you guys the opportunity to vote for what you're interested in seeing me review. Ohuhu markers have gotten a lot of hype here on YouTube. I know I am not the first artist to review them, but I am reviewing them by popular request. Several people wanted to see what my opinion of these markers would be. In general, I thought they were pretty dang good considering all the hype and considering their very inexpensive price point. I went for the brush markers. I found that they had a decent color gamut. It includes a colorless blender, and there's not too many grays in this set, which is great because some of the other inexpensive sets I've reviewed, like Shuttle Art, Milo Art, and Artex, sometimes have way too many grays to really be as useful as I'd like. So for today's field test, we're taking a look at the 48-piece Ohuhu set. I'm going to be doing my field test in my handy dandy Strathmore mixed media sketchbook. This is number 4, as you guys can see from the cover. I find doing the field test on the same paper time and time again gives me a better feel for how the markers perform and allows me to focus on the marker's performance rather than flaws that the paper may throw. As you guys can see, I have several other alcohol marker reviews and field tests here in this little sketchbook. So it's really handy to be able to compare. So that would be the Shuttle Art field test, for example. And it not only includes my field test, but it also includes my swatches and my blend tests. So if you guys are interested in checking out more affordable alcohol markers, please check out the playlist that I'll have linked down in the description below. So here is our Ohuhu swatches for the 48-piece set. The 48-piece set was about $31.98 on Amazon, and like I said, I'll link that down in the description below. For today's field test, I want to do something a little bit unusual. I actually want to do a start to finish field test with you guys. So we're going to start with our sketch, and I'm using pink Pilot Color Eno lead for the underdrawing. You guys can also see my Ohuhu notes from the unbox and swatch video. I want to disclose something right here, right now. So, as you guys probably know, I record the audio frequently in post. So, hi, it's Future Beck, and I usually time-lapse my videos. So, like this portion here has been time-lapsed a couple times just to get us under the 30-minute mark. So, I had really well-written notes for this field test, but yesterday was Patch Tuesday and I was working in Notepad, so I think you guys can probably put 2 and 2 together and figure out what happened. I'm pretty disappointed because I really liked those notes. They had all my color information listed out. They had which color was used when. They were really well written notes, and they would have made a great transcript for this video. And I really like including transcripts for these videos for people who might be hard of hearing or need that written visual in addition to our moving video component. I'm one of those learners. I prefer written tutorials over video tutorials when I'm trying to learn something new. So I apologize for that. I am actually really disappointed in that. However, on the plus side, you guys do get a start to finish field test. You get to see part of my process, and for today's field test, inspired by the bright, fun, colorful color gamut in the Ohuhu markers 48-piece set, I decided to go with a lineless alcohol marker style, and that's why we're sketching with the pink color Eno lead. I've used this technique in lots of marker tutorials, so I'll make sure I link a few of those down in the description below if you guys are interested in learning how to do this technique yourselves. The materials are pretty simple. I happen to prefer using the Pilot Color Eno mechanical pencils myself because I don't need to sharpen them, but you can honestly use almost any color pencils you wish. Another reason I like these colored leads is they're very erasable, so they don't leave a lot of ghosting. Something else I wanted to show you guys was how art can develop from a thumbnail. I usually, when I'm doing these kind of videos, when I'm doing a lot of my color tutorials, I start with an already sketched inked piece that's ready to color. So I wanted to show you guys a bit more of the development and a little bit more of the process. And Futureback is also kind of pleased with how this piece turned out. So hopefully you guys will stick around with me until the end. So enjoy watching the sketching. So we have our completed sketch. I've erased all the extra extemporaneous lines, anything that really isn't that necessary. And we're going to go ahead, pull out our Ohuhu markers, and get started. So the first thing I want to do is select the majority of colors that I'm going to be using for this piece. Now, this is normally what I would run through the entire selection of markers I picked for this illustration. And that's normally when I would have written them down in my handy dandy notepad for me to be able to read them to you guys. But you guys know what happened. Hopefully you can see well enough. I'm editing on a teeny tiny tiny little phone screen, so I can't actually see the numbers, but hopefully you guys can. And fortunately, I did do most of my color picking based off of the chart that we made in the unbox and swatch video. These sort of color swatch charts on the paper you actually plan on using for your art are super helpful because they give you a very realistic idea of how the colors are going to look in your finished piece, so you don't end up with a lot of surprises. Now this isn't my absolute final color selection, but it is an excellent start, so I don't have to have the open bag of markers constantly in the shot. It does give you guys kind of a good idea of the range I want to use. Basically, with the Ohuhu markers, with 48 colors and such a big color gamut, you're really not going to get a lot of nuanced shading. So what I ended up picking was sort of our main local color and then our highlight or our shadow color for that. After picking the majority of my colors, I realized I actually need to pick a color for the shadow for the tops of her eyes. So I ended up going back and selecting the lightest blue I can find, as you guys can see here. And it ended up being a lot darker than I wanted, so I go in with the Colorless Blender and I push it back. And this is when I realized two things. One, these markers are super bleedy. Two, they are very solvent reactive. They're very reactive to the blender, and that is something we can actually use to our advantage since we have kind of a limited range of color. I also go ahead and put down the lightest green for the base color of her eyes and then do the next two darker greens. And then I start applying her skin tone. And I'm using a technique you guys might remember from the Milo art tutorial where we had a really limited range of usable colors. And we're really relying on the white of the paper and over blending or over bleeding to get kind of softer transitions. Once I applied that base color, I'm going in with just a bit of a nice blush color just to add blush to the tops of her eyes, her cheeks, her nose, her lips, and the insides of her ears. And I'm just kind of working stage by stage, applying our local color and then blending it out with the Colorless Blender. And I promise for the description, I'm going to try to have a list of the colors that I use for this. I'm going to watch this on a bigger screen and transcribe those colors for you guys because I know some of you are working along. You want to learn how to use your Ohuhu brush tip markers. You're kind of new to alcohol markers. And yeah, there's a lot of Copic tutorials out there, but Copics actually handle pretty differently than these Ohuhu markers. That was something else I realized. The brush tip on these markers, it's not a bad brush tip, but it's very different from the foam rubber sort of super tips. It's not really able to do super fine details. It's too bleedy for that. I kind of feel like I don't have anything to base this off of really, but I kind of feel like the Ohuhu markers, the Shuttle Art markers, the Milo Art markers, they may be having, they may have the same manufacturing company manufacture the inks because they all react the same way. They're very similar. So for her sleeves, I want them to be transparent, so I applied the local color in a very limited area, and then I blended it out a lot. I allowed that to dry, and I'm going in with another layer of that same original local color. And when I say local color, that just refers to sort of the base color that things are. So for example, like when we look at grass, we mostly see green. That's the local color. Grass would also have shades of blues and much darker greens and yellows and maybe even some white, but the base color we think of when we think of grass is going to be a green. Once our local color, our first layer on the skin has dried, I went in with a very light brown to add some shading. This color ended up much darker than I swatched and than I expected, but once it dried, it ended up kind of working out for me. I also went in and added some, or I'm going to go in and add some freckles with the same color. And this brush tip does not lend itself well to teeny tiny details like freckles. If you work large, this is fairly small. This is like a 5x5 by 8.5 sketchbook, so it's pretty small. If you work large, these markers might be good for you because they are very juicy and they're capable of covering very large areas very quickly. So once her skin had a bit of a chance to dry, I'm going in and coloring in her hair, and I want her hair to be purple. So she has these little odongo going on in her hair, these little hair buns sort of in the shape of a heart, and I realized originally I was going to do her hair pink, and then I realized she was going to look like a knockoff Chibiusa, and I was like, oh no, we cannot do that. We got to go with something else. And I know I do twin tails a lot. I think they're cute. I probably should also have some more cute fairy key hairstyles in my repertoire. So once the first layer of pink dried, I went in with sort of a medium purple color. It was like an RP1, something like that. And this is just kind of our medium color, not really, I guess it's our base color. The pink was applied to be a highlight. And I have a really hard time getting into those sort of smaller areas without it bleeding out. These markers are very, very prone to bleeding, even if you allow the prior layer to dry. So usually with markers and blending, if you, it's like watercolor where you can do wet into wet, and that's when the alcohol solvent is still wet on the paper, and you'll get very, very soft blends, or you can let it dry, so wet over dry, and then you'll get much sharper transitions, which can be great for hair. So I felt like this application was a little sloppy, so I went back in with that really light pink and I just kind of blended it out a little bit. Now that's something I actually really like about these markers, is that, like I said earlier, they're very blender reactive, they're very solvent reactive. And you can get kind of a watercolor technique with these that I find I haven't necessarily been able to get with some of my other alcohol markers. So it's just kind of a different way of handling alcohol markers. You can get kind of a softer technique with these, which I actually really like. So for her shirt, I'm going in with kind of a cooler light blue, and I'm just doing a base color right now. You guys can still see the skin tone on her arms, and I actually left some of that paper white so that it'll appear more transparent. And while that's drying, I'm going in with a much darker purple in her hair just to kind of add some of the darkest shadows, to add some definition and to add some detail to it. So for the Band-Aid on her face, I went with something that was bright and cute. So I went with yellow that's going to add some contrast with the purple and the blue that we've already got going on. And I'm trying to use kind of a limited color palette for her. She's Fairy Key inspired, but I know I have this really bad tendency of throwing every color at my art pieces and then wondering why there's no color theory and nothing seems to work. So I'm trying to keep it kind of limited here. So once the blue of the shirt had a chance to dry, I went in with the same color to add another layer. In some of my Copic tutorials, I mentioned that you can get 3 tones of color from each marker. So that's like 3 increasingly darker shades from each application as you layer it. With the Ohuhu markers, they are so juicy and they saturate the paper so quickly, you really don't get that much color layering. So generally, when it comes to alcohol markers, I recommend people apply a few layers in order to build up that color rather than relying on having a really large marker collection. So once that had a chance to dry, I went in with a darker blue and started applying shadows. And I'm trying to keep things kind of light and airy because we have such a limited selection of colors. I'm really also relying on the blender and the white of the paper to add additional color. So for the darker blue, I blended it out in some areas with a lighter blue and then left the shadows sharper in other areas. So that's kind of the difference between indirect cast shadows and cast shadows. And for her shorts, I wanted to go, so originally I was going to do her shorts purple and her hair pink, too much like Chibiusa. So instead I reversed that. So I'm going with pink for her shorts, and as you can see, we did purple for her hair. So I'm using the same very light pink that we initially used as kind of the highlight color in her hair for the shorts, leaving some white of the paper and then blending that back out a little bit with the Colorless Blender. And then I'm going in with sort of this teal blue, and I'm coloring in the bows, her choker, I'm going to color in the buttons, etc. And I'm leaving some of the white of the paper visible. I also applied another layer of our base pink after the first layer had a chance to dry. You can see it actually stands out a little bit better than some of the other colors tend to layer. So looking at it, I'm like, oh, it definitely needs a background, and I decided to freehand a heart, and it ended up being a very wonky heart. The 10-year-olds in my drawing class draw way better hearts than I do. I'm just super out of practice. And I tried to leave a bit of a rim light halo around her, but that was a little bit hit or miss. And I cleaned that up a little bit later on. A lot of art is just having good ideas, great intentions, messing that up, and then figuring out how to fix that. So I want you guys to notice, though, I'm not being particularly careful in my application. I don't care if it streaks because I'm going to put another layer on top of it, and that's going to even out some of the streaks. Initially, I was hoping that these markers were juicy enough that I could be kind of sloppy and kind of quick with them, kind of sketchy with them, and I wouldn't have to do a second layer. That's not quite the case. The ink flow couldn't really keep up with my hand movement. That's okay. You know, that's kind of an unreasonable expectation on my part, but I definitely wanted to try it because if it could, that would be amazing. It would be very easy then to recommend these markers to artists who work really large. And even so, I still think they're a pretty good fit for artists who work much bigger than me. I do feel, though, if you work as small as I do, or if you like to work really tight, these markers may be more challenging for you to use, but that price point is really good in general. At one point, they were like 50 cents each. Now they're closer to 75 cents each, which is still crazy good for alcohol markers. And I do believe, but do check the description down below because I will have corrections on anything I may have misspoken. I do believe someone told me you could get replacements for these, or maybe it was refills, but you have to contact Ohuhu directly. On their website and on Amazon, there's no listings for replacements, but they do have standalone sets like their Skintones set. So if you find that you like these markers, you can order more of them. So on her shorts, I'm going in with our second pink, our darker pink. And I'm using that to kind of add some shadows, to add some definition to the shorts themselves, then blending out just a little bit with the pink that we used earlier. And since the teal blue has had a chance to dry, I'm going back in and adding a second layer just to add some shadows and some definition. So originally on her shorts, I was going to do little yellow ruffles to match the little Band-Aid on her cheek, but I decided instead to match her hair and do purple ruffles. That way we don't have too many colors going on any one article of clothing at any time. And I also decided to color the cuffs of her shirt yellow and then add another layer of yellow on top of that, the darker yellow. And so the teal didn't layer as dark as I wanted, so I grabbed a blue-green to add the shadow to the teal. And then once the purple, the RP I grabbed to do the ruffles dried, I'm going in with a purple to add those darker shadows. So we're almost done markering her. I wanted to finish the background. So the thing about bad art, bad decisions, bad backgrounds is sometimes if you double down and you lean in and you just really reinforce it, it ends up working out. I decided to do equally wonky hearts in several other colors. So we've got teal here, and I thought this could also be a good test for how well these colors layer. And what I mean by that is with watercolor, we can do glazes where we might do yellow and then do blue on top of it. And the area where the blue and the yellow cross, you'll get a green. I wanted to see if we could get that kind of color overlap and color overlay with these markers, or if it just always reactivates the layer underneath, kind of turning things to mush. I'm happy to say you can indeed layer colors, and this is going to help kind of extend your color range because it allows for some color mixing. So I had a lot of fun just kind of picking different colors from the illustration to do the hearts. So here is our marker illustration. Now I want to go in, well, first I'm going to actually color inside her mouth using a red. That way it's not just a white mouth. Now I want to use colored brush pins to do our line art, and these are Tombow brush pins. I really like these. They come in 8 really fun colors, and they're great for doing colored line art. And the reason you might want to do colored line art is it adds a liveliness to your art. Instead of just inking things with black, which sometimes adds too much contrast and can add kind of a dead line weight feel, inking with color adds additional color, so it can add additional nuance, and it's not overly distracting. People aren't distracted away from your marker art by your inking, so it kind of adds something to it. It's also a great way to kind of clean up rougher areas, to add some definition to areas that may have ended up kind of muddy. So for her hair, I'm using the purple Tombow Furenosuke. For her skin, I'm going to use the pink Tombow Furenosuke. And if you guys are interested in these, I really like them. I'm happy to do a standalone video demonstrating how cool I think they are if you guys are interested in that. But I'll also link them down in the description below so you can get your own set. So one of the plus sides of doing this lineless style, it's not actually lineless, we did go in with a line art, but you're not tied to kind of this all-encompassing line art. You can do a much looser line art, you can leave larger gaps than you might normally leave, and just in general it has a lighter, airier feel. So if you're kind of struggling because you use really light colors or you have used really vibrant colors and your line art always just seems to drag your art down, they don't seem to mesh, trying the lineless line art style might be a great option for you, and doing colored line art might be a great option for you. So now we've got our inks done. There's just one more thing I want to do, but I want to talk a bit about the pros and cons of using Ohuhu markers. So the pros are these markers are very cheap. They're about 75 cents a marker. One of the cons is you can get them either through the Ohuhu site or through Amazon. They're not really commonly sold. You can't go to Walmart to get them. You can't go to Michael's to get them. You have to kind of order them online, which is going to be a deal killer for some people because they want to try it before they buy it, which of course is why I recommend you watch reviews like this one. Another one of the pros that's also kind of a con is these markers are very juicy. They have a lot of ink in them, but that makes them very prone to bleeding. They also have a nice selection of colors, not too many grays in this set, but I don't know, with 48 colors, I feel like I'm just not getting enough colors. But one of the pros is also that you can buy additional colors, and they're very affordable. So you could, in theory, if you love these, buy one of the larger sets and then donate your existing set to your Goodwill, to a younger friend, to a friend who maybe would like to get into markers, or maybe even to your local library. So they're affordable enough that even though you can't buy the markers necessarily open stock, as you need to expand your collection like you would with the Blick Studio brush markers or with Copic markers or with Prismacolor markers, you could rehome them to another artist and then buy a larger marker collection. One of the other cons that's also kind of a pro is they're very reactive. So if you apply a little bit of blender marker, it can really push and affect your color. So it is going to take some getting used to. However, this can be used to kind of expand your color gamut so you have more pastels, since the set doesn't really have enough pastels in it, in my opinion. And you can also kind of achieve sort of a softer marker effect, more like watercolors, if that's your jam. So these markers are fairly flexible. All in all, I can definitely see why people love these markers. The hype is real. Now, normally I would be so hesitant to say that, but you know what? When I really feel that way, I have no problem saying it. The hype is real with these markers, and I highly recommend them for anyone who's interested in getting into alcohol markers, maybe younger artists, or maybe for teachers who would like to have alcohol markers available for their students to use, but do not have a lot of budget, or maybe buying these out of their own pocket, and need something that is affordable. So I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this was helpful, useful, and informative. And I want to thank you guys who tipped me via coffee, and that enabled me to purchase this set. I'm going to pick another art supply that we can crowdfund and review together. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys again really soon. Bye, guys!